Hi everybody, this is Phil Holoka from Complete Captive Management Services. And today we wrap up our three-part series on the fronting carrier. Today's conversation is the cash flow and the risk flow when an employer is involved in a group captive which is fronted. Okay, there are two cash outflows from the employer. The first one is collateral. Now, if you recall from last week, collateral is calculated and withheld by the fronting carrier. Okay? The other cash outlay are premium payments. And again, the premiums that are paid by the employer are also held by the fronting carrier. The term of holding premiums from the insureds, the employers, is funds withheld. And that's what we have going on here today. Okay, so to demonstrate the cash outflows, we have to look at each employer. So employer number one, employer number two, and so on are participating in this group captive. The TPA, the third-party administrator, is engaged to do services by each employer. One of the duties of the TPA is to invoice the employer, whether that's on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, it really depends. But the TPA invoices the employer, and within that invoice has operational expenses like the TPA administrative fees, as well as premiums that are to be remitted to the fronting carrier. So the employer pays premiums to the TPA, and then the TPA will remit those premiums to the fronting carrier. Okay? Now, let's assume that this is a 2022 treaty year, which means January, February, March, April. If premiums are paid on a monthly basis, the employer is sending cash through the TPA, ultimately landing with the fronting carrier. Now, let's assume that $1 million is collected by the fronting carrier, and the fronting carrier ultimately has $800,000 of claims and losses and expenses and everything, leaving $200,000 of profit. Well, the fronting carrier will release that $200,000 to the captive once the treaty year has been closed. So in other words, the 2022 treaty year may be open until late 2023, 2024, or maybe even 2025. So in other words, premium collected from all of the insureds land in the fronting carrier's coffers, and then 2 years down the road, those profits are released back to the captive. Now, if the captive collected, or if the fronting carrier collected $1 million, but had 1.1 million of claims and expenses, then the captive will have to refund or remit $100,000. So this is a two-way street. So this demonstrates the cash flow. The takeaway point here is premiums paid into the captive, funds withheld, whatever's left over flows back into the captive many years down the road. Okay? The risk flow in a group captive is relatively simple because the fronting carrier holds the money, and then they pay the claims when they are remitted from the various third-party administrators. So in this example, let's assume, again, that $1 million has been collected, and month number one, month number two, three, and so forth, 12 months. Member number one paid $200,000 of premium and had $100,000 of claims. Member two had $150,000 of premium, but had $400,000 of claims. So When everything is totaled up, $1 million is collected, 800,000 of claims over the past 12 months, leaving 200,000 of underwriting profit. That's very simple math. What's more complicated, and it is important for each employer to understand, is how is that 200,000 allocated back through to the members? Or maybe it's not allocated at all. Okay? So the common methodology is much like a pro rata basis. Member number one paid $200,000 of premium. That represents 20% of the total premium collected. Therefore, member number one is due back 20% of 200,000 or 40 grand. Okay? Member number three doesn't necessarily like that model because they paid $350,000, had no claims. However, member number two paid $150,000 and had $400,000 of claims. So, member number two likes this allocation. Member number three, not so much. Okay? Now, the other methodology is, should only those captives that were contributors to the profit receive any of the collective profits? And that's what this model expresses. So in this model, member number one was a smaller contributor to the profits, therefore they're getting $50,000 back. But member number three was the largest contributor of the profits, therefore they're getting the most money back. Which allocation model is right is really not for the captive manager to decide. It's up to the members to decide. So, with that said, this is the risk flow, but it all boils down to where do the profits go when they are earned. So that's wrapping up the fronting fees. Hope this was informative for you. Until next week when we talk about the direct writer captive. So until then, have a good week. Bye now.